Hello and welcome to this Nomad Chatella video about the canals and flooding in Venice. I'm Nick.
I'm Luna.
And the format of this video is a little bit different from most of our videos because we are streaming this live. So some of you may be watching this live, but we think that most people are going to be watching the recording later. But you'll see the format is a little bit different from our other videos. And so, what was that?
We're going to talk about canals and flooding and everything regarding acqua alta and all the things you need to know about this topic.
So obviously we're coming to you live from Venice. It is January, it's a little cold, but you can see one of the many canals here in Venice. And you know, I think a lot of people, they think of Venice, they think about those canals, and not everybody knows what the story is. Some people have questions about the canals, how they work, can they use them, can they go on boats, can they jump in the canals? We want to talk about some of those things here.
Absolutely.
And of course that popular question is Venice flooding. So because this is a live stream, if you are watching the live stream, you can put comments there in the YouTube video, and you know, we'll try and keep an eye on it here, and maybe we'll answer your questions. No guarantees, but we'll see how it goes.
And if we don't answer your questions now, we will be answering your comments later, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to one of our prepared questions. So, are the streets made of water in Venice? What would you say about that?
Well, basically, yes, you could say that, because the canals are pretty much like normal streets or roads in any other city. So if you're walking around, I don't know, New York or Los Angeles, you would be walking on regular, normal streets. In Venice, you're walking by canals.
Yeah, I mean, in Venice, you know, there are sidewalks. We call that the fondamenta. And then there are no roads where you would see cars. Instead, there are canals where you'll see boats. So you'll still see a lot of places where you can, you know, walk along the sidewalk or the fondamenta, and you'll see the canal right next to it. But the thing you want to kind of visualize Venice and think about what Venice is. Imagine this marshland. It is a shallow lagoon. Well, it does get deep in some places, but generally just a marshy area where they built this city. And when they built the city, basically what they did was build all of these separate tiny islands. So in between each of these islands, you have basically what we would call the canals. So it's not so much that they built a city and then installed canals. They basically had an area with water that they built little tiny islands around. So all of the canals that you see are just the water that was there before they built up the city.
Absolutely.
And so as you're walking through the city, you're walking over little bridges across these canals, you know, all around the city. And then as you're walking around, there's always these canals. You'll see boats, you'll see all sorts of different boats, but of course you still have the sidewalk, the fondamenta, like you would in any other city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that means that the canals are polluted. They have regular traffic, so it's not at all clean water that you see. In fact, during the pandemic, actually, when there was no traffic, we started seeing fish come back. So we could see clear water and fish. But
Did I hear stories of dolphins coming up in the lagoon?
They said there were a couple of dolphins.
But when we say the lagoon, that's the water outside of the city. So if once again we look at the map, there's lots of water outside of the city.
Yeah,
I don't think a lot of dolphins would come into the canals between the streets.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, normally you should consider these canals as actual streets. So with all the pollution and all the dirt that comes with that.
And so you should almost consider it a biohazard.
Yeah.
You know, we see a lot of people, we come to Venice and somebody gets off of the train and they go out and they just want to put their hand into the water. And now they have a very, very dirty hand. Yeah. I see people who want to put their feet into the water. not a good idea at all.
No, if you think about it, in Venice we had a few editions of the Ironman challenge, where there's a grueling competition of swimming, biking, and running, and the swimming is from Venice to Mestre, basically along the Ponte della Libertà. And quite a few of the competitors had to withdraw from the race because they accidentally drank the water and fell sick immediately after. So,
And that's the lagoon, that's not even the canals, but of course the closer you get to the city in the lagoon, the dirtier it may be.
yeah,
And right here you can probably hear, and in a moment you'll see that these canals are open to traffic. And I don't know if that's drowning out our microphones or not, but you can see there's all sorts of boats that will go through these canals. We'll talk about that a little bit more as well.
yeah.
So here's the next question I sort of had prepared. Are all of the canals the same?
No, they are not. Most of the city is formed by small canals, like the one we're speaking from. There are two main canals, the Grand Canal and the Cannaregio Canal, but other than that, it's usually small canals that you can cross through the bridges that are all around the city.
And so the Grand Canal is that one largest canal that runs, sort of snakes through the middle of the city. This is a very, very big canal. I think I have some clips of that. This is a popular clip that you'll see a lot of photographers take this shot. But this is the opening of the Grand Canal, much, much wider. And of course you will see the Vaporetto is the water bus. And of course we have another video on our channel all about public transportation in Venice. And so the Vaporetto is basically the major form of mass transit in Venice. And this is a spot along the Grand Canal where you'll see taxis, you'll see large, not large, but you'll see boats that, carrying garbage or furnishing deliveries to apartments and stuff like that, larger boats. Ambulances. Now, Cannaregio Canal is a different canal off of the Grand Canal that is certainly smaller, but it's bigger than all of the other normal minor canals. And there are smaller Vaporetto boats that can go on Cannaregio Canal. And of course, there's also Vaporetto that go around the perimeter of the city. But those are sort of the two major exceptions to how the canals work in general. So you've got the Grand Canal, and then you've got Cannaregio Canal, and then you've got, I don't know, hundreds, I don't know if it's quite thousands of smaller canals around the rest of the city. There we are. So lots of different canals, but most of what you'll see would be a canal like this. Some are even a little more narrow than this. I would say this is medium to large as far as the typical canals go.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I think a lot of people should be wondering whether they can go on a boat on the canals.
Well, depends on the boat. Of course, you can use public transportation, as we said. You can have a gondola ride. And the gondolas are, I think, generally allowed to go anywhere in Venice. And they always have right-of-way because they are very difficult to maneuver. And so any other boat has to give way to the gondolas. You can take a taxi, a boat taxi. You can have a kayak tour with one of the associations that organize that. You can learn how to row in the traditional Venetian way, also with other associations in town. When it comes to private boats, I'm sure, I know for sure that there are strict regulations. Because, for example, I don't think any private boat is allowed on the Grand Canal in general. But, of course, there are limited traffic areas, and all sorts of regulations, which you should definitely check very carefully if you do have your own private boat and you want to use it in Venice, because of course there's a lot of traffic. And I remember even when UNIC went to participate to the Vogalonga.
We should talk a bit about that.
Yeah, the Vogalonga is this. I guess it's a race.
It is a race. I always tell people it's officially a race, but nobody really competes. It's more of a party. And it was originally created as a protest because up until just last year, there were huge cruise ships that would dock in Venice. There's still a lot of boat traffic that is generally, the word that comes to mind is offensive, but disruptive to the ecosystem, to the people who live here. So the Vogalonga was originally a protest. So it's this race around the Venetian lagoon, only in human-powered boats. So kayaks, rowboats, dragon boats, all sorts of stuff. So it's every year, and it shuts down all of the other boat traffic. And it's a great opportunity to row or paddle in the canals or around Venice, but you do have to register for the race, either as an individual or part of a team. And there are businesses here who will rent kayaks specifically for that event, if you want to do that individually on a kayak.
And I remember, like, after the end of the Vogalonga, which finishes in the San Marco Basin, basically you're left to your own devices. Like, okay, the race is over, go home, but that can be very dangerous because you don't know exactly where to turn, where to end up, and you.
Well, me being on a kayak, having rented it from a local business, they gave me instructions on how to get back to the home base. But maybe they didn't think too much, or maybe it didn't happen as often, but a kayak is slower than the other boats. So by the time I was ready to go back, the big boat traffic had started up. So my route back was kind of closed off by boats that would crush me. And I upset a few gondolieri going on a path that the gondolieri use for their business.
And that's the thing, like, gondolieri do not like and can't stand
other boats.
Other boats and whoever gets in their way. So it can be quite confrontational.
Consider the possibility that if my kayak had collided with a gondola, that's a very expensive boat. That is their livelihood, that business. So.
We're talking Ferrari, Lamborghini level, if it was a car. So you don't want to collide with them.
So there definitely are opportunities for you to get out on the canals, on the water, and I strongly recommend it. You know, people think about the gondola ride, and if that's the option that you choose, it's a very good option, but it's very expensive. It's not something you do multiple times, I think.
Unless you go on the gondola that is actually a ferry, a traghetto.
The traghetto is the same boat as the gondola, and it just goes across the Grand Canal. So instead of walking all the way around the city to get to a spot on the other side of the Grand Canal, you could take traghetto.
And it's only €2, I think, for tourists. And sure, you are standing in a gondola rather than sitting down, but if you want to experience being in a gondola without paying the steep price of getting a gondola ride, that's another way to experience that.
So if you're doing that once in a lifetime vacation, I would recommend the gondola. It's very expensive, but it is a great experience. But I'm a big fan of the kayak, and you said association, and I wouldn't really use that word in America. It's businesses. It's local businesses that run kayak tours. The kayak is a great way to see the city. It's just such a different way to see the city when you're actually on the water, and the kayaks are a great way to go. There are also the private taxis, also fairly expensive, but it is certainly an option. But I would recommend get out on the water if you can. Oh, the other thing, you did mention a bit, there is at least one, maybe a few companies, small businesses, that will teach you how to do the rowing style of the gondola. It's a slightly different boat, but it is the same style of paddling. And you can sign up for an afternoon's class, and you will not learn how to do it in one lesson.
Absolutely.
But it's nice to get exposed to. Or if you are here for a while and you want to do multiple lessons, they can do that as well. And that is a lot of fun. So yeah, definitely recommend you try one of those options. And you'll see lots of people who live here with their own smaller boats, you know, teenagers with a boat with LED lights and music playing. You'll see that at night.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super fun. So we talked a bit about this. Can you swim in the canals?
Please don't. Do not. Never.
You know, I heard a story, you might be able to tell me if this is true. Somebody of, I think maybe the generation before our parents, would talk about swimming in the Grand Canal.
Yes.
How true is this?
I'm not sure about the Grand Canal, but definitely my grandparents' generation would tell us stories about being able to dive and swim all around Venice and whatnot.
It sounds fantastic.
It does. Also, let's remember it was a different time. There was a war. There was no drinking water in the houses, so maybe the perception also of danger was completely different back then. And either way, like if, as we said before, Ironman competitors couldn't handle the water, we probably can. We definitely can't.
And if you spend enough time in Venice, you'll hear the story of somebody who was drunk last night and fell in the canal. So what happens if you fall in the canal?
Okay, so let's...
Don't fall in the canal. Don't
Please
get that.
don't.
But
do your
happens.
best not to. So first of all, if you dive intentionally into the canals, it's, I want to say a felony, but I'm not sure. But you can be exiled from the city, basically.
Wow.
That's what happens. Like you get a fine, a hefty fine, and you are not allowed into the city anymore for the next whatever years. So it's a big deal. If you accidentally fall into the canal, it happened actually to a girl I used to know, and she had to be rushed to the hospital to get a tuberculosis protocol,
Wow.
anti-tetanus shot, and a number of other protocols done to her. So you don't want to fall into the canal. You really don't.
You know, I had somebody tell me this, and this is completely apocryphal. I don't know if this is true, but the thing that I was told, if somebody falls in the canal, remember, it is this marshland. It is not a solid bottom. It is this very loose mud. And I've seen that even around the lagoon, you know, very loose mud. And so if you fall in the canal, don't try to stand on your feet because it'll sink into that mud. You know, tread water, or if it's shallow enough, and it may be shallow enough to stand on your knees, and then you can support yourself, but you're not going to spend much time there. But also, stories I've heard, which I 100% believe is true, under that water you will find amazing things. Garbage. Somebody told me once they drained a canal for maintenance, they found bicycles and laundry machines.
Oh yeah.
The horrifying things that are under that water,
Oh yeah.
you don't want to touch.
This is regularly part of our news cycle, because every canal has to be drained and cleaned from time to time, or not even drained, just cleaned, because there are some heroes in my eyes. They are gondolieri who are also divers, certified divers, and they dive and clean whatever garbage they find at the bottom of the canals. And yes, there were electric scooters and washing machines and whatever you can think of. They probably found it at the bottom of the canals, so it's horrifying.
So even if you could stand on the bottom, who knows what you would be standing on.
Yeah.
And I've seen these divers because they also work safety for the Vogelonga race.
Yeah.
They are not in wetsuits. They are in dry suits. They are completely sealed from the water around them. It's a very particular type of diving.
Yeah.
Don't swim in the canal.
Don't.
Don't go in the canal.
Yeah.
Okay, so the big question is Venice flooding? Is Venice sinking? So let's talk a bit about that.
Not when you're going to visit. So come. No, don't worry about that. It's not
The city's
sinking.
not going to fall down into the water. I think it is on a geologic perspective, technically sinking at an extremely, you know, the movement of tectonic plates, that sort of thing. But it is sinking but it's not just going to fall into the water.
Yeah, exactly.
But it does flood.
It does. It does flood because of the location, because of how the Adriatic Sea is shaped, because of astronomical causes and the winds and whatnot. Venice does flood from time to time. It's a phenomenon that is mostly typical of a fall and spring, but I would say the only season that is not subject to flooding is summer, because even in the winter you get quite a few of these episodes.
And so it's that area around Venice, that water of the lagoon rises and falls with the tides. But if you look farther out on the map, and I don't have an image of it here, it's actually mostly enclosed from the surrounding sea.
Yeah.
So water flows into the lagoon and out of the lagoon, and in certain conditions it will rise extremely high.
Yeah.
To the point where, you know, the fundamenta that we see over here, water will be up on there, and people would be forced to walk through water.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what happens when it floods.
Okay, so first of all, what do we mean by flooding? Okay, so the reference point is in the sea at the Punta della Salute, and the reference measure was from the 1800s, more or less. So when the water is 90 centimeters higher than the reference point, the city starts being slightly flooded. Then if we go above 1 meter, 1 meter and 10, it's mostly flooded. If it goes beyond 1 meter 40, it's completely flooded.
So you're seeing some measurements there on the screen from a website that Venice maintains with information about this. And of course you should take a look at this website if you want to learn more, but you can see those measurements. And it's like Luna said, a specific place in town. If it does get up to 100 centimeters above that point, not a problem, not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat to see. But if it goes up to 120, 130, or even 140, then you're seeing significant flooding. You're seeing where people are having a hard time walking through the city. You'll see that there are some doors on some buildings that you see this little metal shield at the bottom of the door that will stop the water from flooding in. And you'll see people will walk around with those long rubber boots that come up almost to the knees. And if this happens when you're here, you know, sometimes a hotel will have those rubber boots for you to wear, but sometimes, well, every time, there's somebody on the street selling these. They're like plastic gloves that go up over your legs that you can use to walk around.
Yeah, or garbage bags will also help you out in this situation. And yeah, so remember that in case of acqua alta, flooding.
Well, before you say that, the other thing is there are raised walkways.
Exactly.
And in here in January, you'll see those walkways are there and they're stacked up, ready for if it's flooding, they'll unfold them, and there's like this raised, along the fundamenta, like a raised sidewalk that people can walk on instead of all the way down.
Yeah, so remember that the city becomes a little less accessible, and so keep that in mind. Even the Basilica in San Marco now has permanent barriers all around, which of course protect the Basilica but make it a little less accessible. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
And there was a time when I was walking around during the Acqua Alta and I almost walked into a canal, because when the water comes up above the level of the fundamenta, you don't know when the ground stops and the canal begins. And I came very close to just walking straight into the canal.
And the girl I mentioned before who fell into the canal, that was the exact situation. So she didn't see the end of the fundamenta and she just stepped right into the canal.
So how do we know if it's going to be flooded while you're here?
Before we go to that, remember, this is the same water from the canals, so it's still a a horrible idea to touch it, to go barefoot in acqua alta, which I've seen some people do.
It seems like a nice idea. It seems like this fun walking through the water. It's not clean.
It's not like rainwater or puddles or anything. It's canal water. Don't.
So if you're coming to Venice and you want to know whether there's going to be acqua alta, if you use Telegram, there is a Telegram channel that you can subscribe to that will give you updates. But there's also this website with just general information about the, what happens during acqua alta. They have a chart with the tides for the next few weeks that you can keep an eye on when the tide will be up. And then there is the siren system.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that.
I have never experienced the sirens. I have to
I've heard
say.
it once.
Okay. Basically, there are sirens placed in many, if not most, bell towers around Venice. And if there is a forecast of acqua alta, they will go off
And
to alert the population.
if you don't know what it is, it sounds like an air raid siren. And it can be a little bit disturbing. What is that? What's happening right now? Don't worry. And in fact, let's hear it. So I'm going to play this clip for you, and it'll kind of cut our microphones while we do this, but it's going to give you'll hear the initial siren. This is a siren that gets everybody's attention. And then there are tones. And if you hear one tone, it's going to be that 110 centimeter level. You'll hear the one tone, and if it graduates up to the next tone, that's the 120, to the next tone is 130, and up to 140. And it will sound like this. So that's how you're going to know whether it's flooding. Of course, you should check out the website or the Telegram channel, but if you're just walking around the city and you hear those sirens, at least now you know what's about to happen.
And usually they are early in the morning, so just to give a head start to everybody that there's going to be acqua alta during the day.
But there's something that has changed in the past even year or two, to the point where you may never see acqua alta again. Of course, people who live here year-round will still see it, but now there's a safeguard.
Yes, there is. So it's called MOSE, and it's a project that actually started 50 years ago.
15?
50.
Wow, 50, okay. I didn't know it's been in the works that long.
Yeah, and it took a long time to build it, but finally it's operative. And basically it's like a, I don't know, a temporary dam,
Yeah,
you could say.
that's a good way to describe it.
It's a series of
Temporary seawall.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a series of barriers that get lifted up and at the end of the lagoon to avoid the water from coming in.
And these are in the 2 or 3 openings between the lagoon and the open sea.
Yeah,
they can more or less close that inlet.
Exactly. So basically it gets activated normally every time there's a forecast of 110 centimeters. So that means that for lower tides, you could still see some acqua alta in some lower parts of the city. But for the most part, we should be able to avoid acqua alta moving on. The thing is, it costs hundreds of thousands of euros to activate the MOSE every time they activate it. So they try to save money, of course, and not activate it if they're not 100% sure that there's going to be 110 centimeters. But on the website and on the Telegram channel, they regularly update if they are activating the MOSE or not. And so you can be informed if there's going to be acqua alta or not.
So that's not to say that you'll never see acqua alta again, but it will be less often.
Yeah.
And a big part of it is avoiding the damage that the floodwaters do to historic sites.
Absolutely.
The disruption it has on the local businesses and personal homes and much more. So it's not an end to it, but it's something that will make it happen far less often in the city.
Yeah, even you have to consider that this is salt water, so every time it enters the structures, the buildings, it damages the bricks, the construction, and so the more this happens, the worse it is for all the buildings and the houses and everything. So if we can avoid it, then that's for the best.
The water is very beautiful, but it can be destructive,
Yeah.
like any other water.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think those are the topics we wanted to cover. Is anything else we wanted to say about the canals?
Just don't dive from the bridges, please don't. If you are in town in July, you might see the Redentore celebration, which features a huge number of boats in front of San Marco. So if you know somebody who lives here and has a boat, maybe that's a great time to visit and to experience Venice on a boat. Other than that, let us know if you have any questions about this, any comments, and we will be more than happy to answer all of your doubts.
And if you're interested in Venice, we've got several other videos, how to get into Venice, how to get around Venice on foot, how to use the public transportation, and more videos on the way. So thanks for checking out this video on the canals and flooding in Venice.
Thank you.